So before I get into the nuclear piece of it, I just wanted to quote from the head of Raytheon, who made this statement at their earnings call, their most recent earnings call, which was just kind of a stunning statement. It's the kind of thing these folks believe, but they rarely say in public. So he says, we're seeing, I would say, opportunities for international sales. We just have to look at last week where we saw the drone attack in the UAE, which have attacked some of their other facilities. And of course, the tensions in Eastern Europe, the tensions in the South China Sea, all of these things are putting pressure on some of the defense spending over there. So I fully expect we're going to see some benefit from it. So we know where their heads are at. Now, whenever you talk about the nuclear lobby, the military industrial complex, there's a great danger that people are just going to walk away and say, wow, that's depressing. I mean, they have so much power, maybe we should just give up. And so to start out, I just want to kind of set the scene before I make that mistake myself. So we have to keep in mind that as powerful as it is, the military industrial complex is not unbeatable. The budgets come down before, at the end of Vietnam, at the end of the Cold War. Arsenals have been reduced as a result of things like the nuclear freeze campaign. There were 60 to 70,000 nuclear weapons in the world in the 60s, down to 14 or 15,000 now, which is still, of course, enough to end life as we know it. But my point being that the industry doesn't always get what it wants when there's citizen action. There's been weapons canceled, like the MX missile, the F-22 combat aircraft. And of course, on the global scale, we have the treaty to ban nuclear weapons. So as difficult as this moment is, I think we just have to remember there have been victories in the past, and we can't stop building power to make sure we have victories in the future. So we're at another turning point, like we were at the end of the Cold War or the end of Vietnam, because the toll of the pandemic, the crisis of climate change, the impacts of racial and economic injustice, all have kind of begun to sink in with people that military threats are not the biggest risks to our future, to our lives and livelihoods. And the more we can drive that home, I think the more we can change the subject and the direction of policy away from tensions with Russia and China, away from a new nuclear buildup, towards investing in things that we need. So, as you all know, nuclear weapons is a big business, which is why they lobby so hard. And they're embedded in the larger military-industrial complex. The top 5 military contractors, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, General Dynamics, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman, have made $2 trillion since 2001 and spent about $1 billion on lobbying over the same period. So essentially, they've gotten about $18,000 in contracts for every dollar they spend on lobbying. Quite the return on investment. Now, of course, some of that money would have flowed anyway, but given the amount that's at stake, this is why they put so much effort into campaign contributions and lobbying. And of those 5, 4 of them are heavily involved in nuclear weapons. Lockheed Martin makes submarine launched ballistic missiles. General Dynamics makes ballistic missile submarines. Raytheon makes air-launched cruise missiles. Northrop Grumman is involved in both the new intercontinental ballistic missile and the new nuclear-armed bomber. Boeing makes a lot of money from missile defense, which is, of course, woven in to the whole nuclear arms race. So the nuclear business itself, according to the Congressional Budget Office, the United States will spend about $634 billion in the next decade alone on nuclear weapons, on the development of new ones and the deployment and maintenance of existing ones. And that includes $264 billion for a new intercontinental ballistic missile, which, as William Perry has said, one of the most dangerous weapons we have on Earth, because the president would only have a few minutes to decide whether to launch it on warning of an attack, which would greatly increase the possibilities of an accidental war based on a false alarm. So not only shouldn't we be spending on the new one, I think we shouldn't have these weapons at all. Now, to give a sense of scale, nuclear weapons spending in recent years has come in at over $40 billion a year, which is about 10 times the size of the Centers for Disease Control. It's comparable to the budget of the State Department and Agency of International Development combined. So we're spending as much on nuclear weapons as on our entire diplomatic enterprise, which is just one sense of how militarized our policies are and how off course. Another example, if you look at just Lockheed Martin, they received $75 billion in military contracts in 2020, which is more than 1.5 times the State Department and AID budgets. So just another kind of telltale sign of how our budget is headed in the wrong direction. So, what tools of influence does the nuclear weapons industry have? Well, the arms industry spends about $50,000 per election cycle on campaign contributions and well over $100 billion a year on lobbying. And I think the lobbying, to me, is the most powerful thing they have in their toolkit. The industry averages 700 lobbyists per year, more than one for every member of Congress. And about half of those lobbyists, those 700, work for nuclear weapons producing companies. Many of them have come from government, and so they have great connections with the people in government who decide how much to spend on these things. That revolving door between government and industry, Government Accountability Office indicated there were at least 1,700 examples in recent years of generals, admirals, acquisition officials from the Pentagon going from government to these companies. And of course, not only do they lobby their former colleagues, but when they're in government, they're already thinking ahead to jobs in industry and often go lighter in regulating the arms companies than they should. There's also, yeah, 1 minute. Wow, time flies when you're having fun. So there'll be much more to talk about. I'd say the other main thing, there's two things I would say. One is the funding of think tanks. The Pentagon and the Contractors have given $1 billion to think tanks over the last 5 to 7 years. Many of the ones you've heard of, like Heritage, Brookings, et cetera. And they also populate commissions like the National Defense Strategy Commission, which has advocated a 3 to 5% increase in Pentagon spending, which would push the budget to $1 trillion over the next half decade. That commission, congressionally mandated, more than half of its members were board members, consultants, or came from think tanks funded by the weapons industry. So on many different levels, they're shaping the debate and they're leaning on Congress. But as I said, I think if we build enough citizen power, we can overcome even that. So I thank you.